like to provide a review for the final exam from all of the material that we've learned this semester. إن شاء الله اليوم نريد أن نقوم بالمراجعة عامة استعدادا للامتحان الأخير.
So chapter number 1, if you remember from chapter number 1, we talked about theories. And there were generally two types of theories that I gave you. The first one was we talked about the positive theory. So you need to remember that a positive theory addresses one of those theories that we talked about. And the other type of theory was a normative theory. So you need to make sure you know the difference between these two theories. In addition, we talked about the history, and we spent a lot of time talking about the history of accounting, and we know that accounting started in many parts of the world. So you need to make sure to remember, where did accounting start? Where did the modern day accounting begin? You should know the important people in the history of accounting, and you should also know how we arrived to the current accounting that we have now. We also talked about something called Black Tuesday. And of course, this was a stock market crash in 1929. So you need to know the details of this crash to prepare for your final exam. In addition, and at the very end of chapter number 1, we talked about the development of accounting in the United States. And we talked about many organizations and many types of rules and laws that were developed in the US. We gave you some example of some companies that did not do so well in the United States. And we learned the lessons from the 1929 stock market crash. And we explained some of these at the very end of chapter number 1. Chapter number 2, we talked about the conceptual framework. And of course, the conceptual framework, you need to know the function. Why do we have the conceptual framework and what do we use it for? You should also know the 3 levels of the conceptual framework in great detail. Chapter number 3. Chapter 3, we talked about international accounting and how do we develop some of the processes in international accounting going from one country to another country. And we talked about some of the issues that we have in terms of business accounting issues. We talked about the factors that affect the development of accounting systems. We talked about many different factors. You need to know those factors in detail. And we also talked about preparing financial statements in other countries. So I gave you about 5 different approaches that you can prepare financial statements in different countries. You should know all 5 of them in detail. The other thing we talked about was the International Accounting Standards Board and the IFRS. You need to know what the IASB is, and you need to know in detail the International Financial Reporting Standards as well. And the last thing we talked about in chapter 3 was the Norwalk Agreement. And you need to know, what was this agreement about, and what are the details in this agreement. Also, you need to know the Omani related issues that we spoke about in chapter 3. I gave you some handouts and some information that I gave you in Moodle about financial standards in Oman, and also about the different organizations in Oman that handle the regulation in Oman. So you need to know that information as well. Chapter number 4, we talked about income concepts. We talked about issues related to income. And the first thing we talked about was the purpose of reporting income. So you need to know, what is the reason why we report income. Next, we talked about 2 very important principles, a revenue recognition principle. You need to know, when can we record revenue? When should we record revenue? And you need to know the conditions of recording revenue according to the GAAP. We also talked about expense recognition. The same thing here. You need to know, what is the general meaning and understanding of the expense recognition principle.